Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. It's the first week of Into the Abyss, so I hope that everyone is doing well, but it's also been a pretty difficult week because lots of people are losing ships in the Abyss, and that includes myself. Now, it came so unexpectedly that I don't have any footage of it, but I lost my sacrilege in a tier 2. It was a double Vedmak spawn, and basically their DPS just ramped up too quickly, couldn't get rid of them before they broke my tank, and I tried overheating, I tried everything that I could. It just was right in their favor by maybe 5 or 10 seconds or something like that. It was just a couple more volleys and the final Vedmak was in structure, but he actually got through my sacrilege. The main reason is I went a little bit greedy with the sacrilege on TQ. I put in some extra DPS, trying that I could clear the sites more quickly, and that is basically what replaced the low slot for a reactive armor hardener, which, well, was my first thought on CC. It's going to be a very nice way to block the resistance gap without having to refit all the time. And it turns out that that was actually something that was very much needed to keep running tier 1s, tier 2s, maybe tier 3s stably in the sacrilege. And so my next one will be with a better tank, with that adaptive tank, but right now it costs a little bit too much. So we are switching up to a Gila for the Abyss at the moment. It's going quite alright. I'm actually taking a fit that I found on Reddit, and I'll show that to you guys in the upcoming videos. We are here for the market, of course. If you, by the way, have interesting experience in the Abyss, feel free to put those in the comments. But for now, we're here for the market, of course. So let's get started. As always, we are going to start with some plex and stuff, and that is, no, don't want to install that update. That is at 210. Like that. So let's take a look at that, and the first thing that we can notice is that we have further hesitation here, so we're not breaking out to the 3 million just yet. We are at relatively low plex. Volumes are up a little bit, but not by too much. And my theory at the moment, there could be some sale going on a little bit, but what could be happening is that people lose quite expensive ships in the Abyss, and if they want to replace them right away, they might just start selling off some plex in order to do so. If you are short on cash in a pinch, then that's definitely something that is often considered, I think. And so in Jita itself, these plex cost 2,944,000 ISK for the sellers, a little bit below 2.9 million for the buyers. In the player-owned trade hubs, it only goes down by 20,000 ISK or something like that, so very close to that, above 2.9 million. And the buyers, that's pretty much the same range as well. So plex still under pressure a little bit, and we're seeing a bit of a higher volume than usually, unless it's of course a trade spike, and that in my humble opinion, does mean that there are people that are losing their ships in the Abyss and that are replacing them with new ones by selling some plex. If we see, we'll take a look at the end at the cruisers, and we'll see that there's lots of cash flowing in that market at the moment. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate also going down in price on increased volume. That must be a CCP sale though. That's pretty much the only thing that can create this kind of a pattern. We went up to almost 1.25 billion, not so bad. We're now back down to 1.1 billion for the sellers. Buyers coming in at around 1 billion ISK. But that's, again, lots of fresh supply coming in for these training certificates. When this hits a bottom, who knows how low this can go. This does create sort of another buy opportunity. Even now, if you could buy them very close to 1 billion ISK, it's not bad. If you look at this entire chart, you can probably expect to be able to sell them at 125 or 1.3 billion at some point. That's a pretty nice profit. It's definitely something to keep an eye out for. If we again go well below a billion ISK, then I'd say, considering the pattern that we're seeing here, that's a for sure investment that you can make. One disadvantage, you'll want some patience because these sales do generate massive volumes of the goods, and it takes quite a bit of time on normal trade volumes for all of that to get absorbed. But I think for the longer term, these could be good investments on these downturns of sales. Next up, we have the skill extractor that is following plex very closely, actually pretty damn stable on the chart here, selling for 327 million ISK, and the buyers are coming in at 324.5 million ISK. So very narrow margin here again, and actually a flat price. Now, what could be interesting are the skill injectors. Let's take a look at the large ones, and this surprises me a little bit. We're continuing this very slow downtrend in the large skill injector market, selling for less than 800 million ISK. Buyers coming in, oh, that's, yeah, it's actually just one jump out in the I Choose You Trade Hub. And then the buyers coming in at 778 million ISK. Under pressure a little bit, looks like there's not that much demand right now for these skill points. I do think that will turn around a little bit when people actually grab the skill books for the Triglavian stuff, but it has this progression, which means that at first you need the small weapons before you can train the medium weapons, and then you need that for the large weapons, for instance. It's the same with the ships. So I, for instance, have the medium weapon skill book and the cruiser skill book that has dropped for me so far. I plugged them in, but I can't start their training just yet. So there's no need right now, I think, for lots of skill injectors, because people still need to grab more of those skill books in general. The small skill injector is going up in price a little bit. Quite interesting to see this little bump in the small skill injector. Maybe some people are finding these small skill books and wanting to get that trading out of the way. Selling for 161 million ISK, buyers coming in at 154. And then the daily alpha skill injector actually going down in price a little bit. I don't know. I honestly don't really know the state of the alphas at the moment. I think for tier 1 and tier 2, it's going to be challenging, but I think that they can actually participate in the Abyssal Dead Space content, but it's going to be very tough on them. And Triglavian stuff, which is basically the reward that you can expect from Abyssal Dead Space, well, you need to be Omega for that. So I'd say once people do make the jump into the Abyss as an alpha clone, you enjoy it enough, it's going to be a lot of incentive to actually go Omega and then eventually start flying other ships and the Triglavian ship. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons why we're actually seeing a little bit of a drop off for the daily alpha injector, whereas the small skill injector actually goes up in price, probably for the small Triglavian skills. Next up, we have some minerals. That's going to be at 730. Alright, and let's get started here. Titanium dropping off a little bit, staying above 5 ISK on the 5-day moving average. Today's average, not so much, so it's not that great. If we put the filter on the GTAS station, 5.10 ISK for the sellers and the buyers. The hell? Oh, man, that's a lot of strange orders, close enough to be picked up by the market tab, but buyers are basically coming in at 4.84 ISK, and I think one of the big problems here are the volumes coming in on the seller side. It's 1.2 billion, 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion, and that puts us from 114 to 511. And here we get another 1.3 billion, another 1.7, another 2 billion. So there are pretty large batches of titanium coming in, putting some pressure on the price. At some point, people will start to invest in that. The big danger is if we break 5 ISK on the seller side, then there is no telling how low we could go before we actually see a bit of a pullback. So titanium under pressure, unfortunately, still selling for more than 5 ISK, so it's still not that bad. Next up, we've got pyrite, that after a very small recovery a couple of weeks ago is now again under pressure, heading for 4 ISK. So it's 416 for the sellers, 397 for the buyers, and yeah, it's only a matter of time, I think, before we'll get closer and closer to 4 ISK, which again will get closer and closer to a 1-year low point. So no sign of any recovery in minerals at the moment. That's actually going down in price still. Next up, we've got Isogen, that is now plateauing at a 1-year low point, less than 30 ISK for Isogen. Oh, that's actually not the next one. Let's first start with Mexalon. that is also under pressure, continuously having to go down from 80 ISK towards 70 ISK. Where are the sellers at? 72.17 and 67.54 for the buyers. That means that just like with titanium, there is some pressure in these high-sec minerals that are doing better than average, but at the moment it's still quite okay. Titanium for more than 5 ISK is quite alright. Mexon for more than 70 ISK is quite alright as well. If we dip below 70, that's where we are in the danger zone, I would say. And we already saw the chart here, Isogen 1 year low point selling for 28.67, less than 30 ISK for Isogen. That's definitely very cheap, and 27.13 for the buyers. And despite that, this is the craziest part here, 163 million units still coming to the market at the second lowest price. Another 50 here, another 43 here. There's just too much supply for the market at the moment. Maybe the destruction that's happening at the moment will eventually help for that, but people are throwing pirate faction ships and Tech 2 ships at the abyss at the moment. So there is really no content that is consuming Tech 1 ships, and as a result, that's basically the reason why all these minerals are under pressure, and despite all the destruction that's happening, it's not converting into a Tech 1 activity, which for me, now that I think about it, could be a very interesting potential. This first abyssal experiment, of course, we'll have to see how people enjoy it, and if CCP can continue to iterate on that. But if they do, who knows, maybe a type of abyssal content, group or solo, doesn't matter, that is geared towards the use of Tech 1 ships. Well, they could just put a restriction on the content, and that is geared towards alpha clone characters. A different reward structure, of course, but that could be very interesting if CCP then wants to try to get the same type of destruction going, but then in Tech 1 ships. It would be far more affordable, far more accessible to a large chunk of the player base and to new players, but they would also be able to have that type of content be just as drastic, as difficult, as dangerous as the current abyssal Dead Space content, which the very first number on the first day, I read an AMA from CCP Rise and CCP Falcon, I think, was like 60% completion in tier 5. Now, if you're going in tier 5, you're taking a pretty blink chip, but losing 40% of those ships, that's quite a bit of destruction, and 80% or something like that for tier 4, and that was on day 1. So people do know these metas, but they are not aiming for 100% completion to become possible. So that is something that you have to understand. When you go into the abyss, there will always be a little bit of risk, and who knows, maybe they could create an abyssal tier that is geared towards Tech 1 ships. That would of course have a different reward structure, but I think their newer players would feel less bad about investing in another Vexor or investing in another Tech 1 cruiser. Risking that in abyssal content is not as bad as risking a Tech 2 ship, for instance. So yeah, quite interesting. Next up we have Noxium, of course, which on a big volume spike is actually staying pretty flat. That's quite unusual, selling for 311 ISK, bars at 284. It's also obviously pretty low. 211 on, yeah, seems to be where the chart is at, so I'm not sure what's happening with the big trade volume here. Next up we have Zydrine, that is basically flat at the current trade range, 660 for the sellers, and buyers coming in at 627. And then we have Megasite that is still under pressure a little bit, actually landing at 625, sellers at 654 and buyers at 576. That's quite interesting. Look at that large spread between sellers and buyers in Megasite, with an average price a little bit closer to sellers than the buyers, but in between the two quite noticeably. So here again, also look at the volumes: 4 million, 2 million, 2.3 million. That's moons being mined out in HiSec, and then all the Megasite available there being brought to the market, and it's no longer the sellers absolutely dominating the price. There are impatient people that actually sell to these buy orders to create the average between the two, and so people can actually grab that Megasite for like 580 ISK without too much trouble. And for the final mineral, we have a Morphite heading down to less than 9,000 ISK, but 9,250 for the seller, still buyers at 8,666, 0.06. That's a sign of the devil, but no, that's just a joke. But yeah, under pressure on the buyers. They're dropping the price quite heavily. Supplies is in the hundreds of thousands, so nothing too crazy there. But on more steady supply, there's no real, well, actually there is stick to destruction, could indicate more demand for more fight. So as long as that keeps happening, I think that we are unfortunately not going to have a very easy time grabbing more fight if you want to invest at that, let's say 8,700 disc. But if more supply keeps coming in and we'll eventually see more fight drop below 9,000 disc, that's where we could potentially get an interesting situation. Next up, we'll move on to our PI. That's at 1510. There we go. Broadcast nodes. Let's take a look at that. 225. And still below that, so yeah, right on the average, I would say. 2.2 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers. Supply is decent, nothing too crazy. Average price is reached, and I think right now, basically, there's always psychology behind the market, of course. Everybody is very heavily focused on Abyss, on the cruisers, on special fits, on expensive stuff, Abyssal Dead Space stuff, Triglavian ships also. All of that stuff is in the meta, and structures are a little bit at the back of people's minds. And as a result here, we have advanced PI materials that are really right on the average. To me, in my opinion, that does indicate that if for some reason someone comes out with lots of supply and actually crashes the price down to a well below average price, you have a very nice potential long-term investment. So that's what I'm keeping an eye out for with these EVE talks. Construction blocks up in price a little bit above average, not by too much anymore. 13,500 for the sellers, 11,700 for the buyers. Nice spread there. The more supply comes in, we'll actually get right back to the average. Consumer electronics next, also pretty much on the average band of 14 to 15,000. It looks like 14,900 for the first seller, 15,400 for most of them, and 14,000 for the buyers, right on that band. Next up, we've got the coolants. That is incredible news. Look at that, going back up towards 10,000 ISK, which is something that we have not seen in like 6 months. Another indication to me that there is actually quite a lot of fuel usage happening at the moment, and that we are slowly up in price there. Despite the fact that the latest patch Into the Abyss has brought improvements to PI that should help get at least some more people into the PI supply chains, I think, because it's less click heavy, and even Marquee Dragon gave it a go, it seems. Sellers 10,000 ISK basically, buyers at 9,200, so really a bit of a comeback for coolants, which is fuel related. That is actually quite interesting. Enriched uranium next was actually quite flat, not at the very bottom, but definitely below its average price from before all the moon mining changes and all the new structures, and is basically still staying in that same range. A little bit under pressure, maybe 11,700 for the sellers, 10,600 for the buyers. Not much to say there. Integrity response drones, this is interesting. Data points at 2.5 million. Where are the buyers at? That's a little bit the question. Look at that, 2.5 for the sellers, 2.363 for the buyers. If you look at the chart here, then 3.5 million during 2 months when the new refineries came out. You know, keep 3.5 million, buying at 2.4 million. Maybe I would love to see it a little bit lower, but if you look at this entire chart, we are probably close to below average buy prices, and maybe a slight opportunity if you want to make your first investments. Next up, we've got mechanical parts heading also for 10,000 ISK. Look at that comeback, 10,200 for the sellers, 9,400 for the buyers. So again, another indication that there is some more demand for fuel out there. Nuclear reactors, very interesting. Look at that drop off, heading for 75,000 ISK on some days, 91,700 for the sellers, 80,000 ISK for the buyers. I would say this, if you look at this entire chart, 1 year low point pretty much, you've got a buy opportunity in nuclear reactors, and it's got this nice volatility that does come back again and again. Very interesting. If you want to make that investment, I think it will pay off. And it could actually pay off quite quickly because of that unpredictable volatility in nuclear reactors, or somewhat unpredictable. It's obviously also a little bit tied to structures. Robotics next, trying to hold at 100,000 ISK, sellers are 102, buyers 95,000 ISK. So, all right, it's actually an average price for robotics even before all the fuel consumption changes. Self-harmonizing power cores next. Look at that little drop off again as well to 2 million ISK. Again, the question is, where are the buyers at? 2.1 million for the sellers, 1.9 million for the buyers. If you want to grab a couple cheap ones, especially if you want to build a structure now, this is a great time to do so. As a long-term investment, perhaps do try to pick them up for less than 2 million for that purpose though. But look at this spike again. If you've got an opportunity at 3.5 million, buying them for less than 2 is not bad. Superconductors staying at the lower end of its average at the moment, selling for 12,000 ISK, buyers at 5,000 ISK. That's a crazy margin. That is a completely crazy margin. So either not seeing anything too strange. Okay, I mean, if you're fast and if that situation is still here by the time the video comes out, of course, you could try to pick up some superconductors at like 6,000 ISK, 7,000 ISK. If you look at this chart, anything below 10,000 ISK is pretty much a nice pickup. So either the chart is bugged or no, or someone came in with lots of superconductors and just started filling out buy orders or something like that. Or is it an attempt at manipulating the price, trying to crash things down? That's a possibility as well, which is something that you could do. For instance, if you have lots of superconductors, you can try to crash the buyers down and then hope that the sellers actually start like massive dumping for some reason. Then pick up the cheap ones, wait for the long term, and then sell them over the course of the term back at like more than 12,000 ISK or something like that. Maybe that's what's happening. Definitely a weird one. You know, I wish I would just be on my main and at least try at like 5,500 ISK or something like that. Next up, we have the test cultures, slightly under pressure, but I'd say around an average price, 9,600 for the sellers, 9,300 for the buyers. If you look at the history here, 7,500 seems to be a buy opportunity price. So yeah, not much to say there. Weightware mainframes, interesting little drop off as well, heading for 2.25 million, actually below average on the chart, I would say. 2.3 million for the sellers and 2.2 million for the buyers. Still a bit too early. I would love to see that a little bit lower, but it does, in my opinion, show that there's not that much money flowing into production and advanced PI. Thus, the price is crashing a little bit. That is, of course, what happens when something like Into the Abyss comes out. The entire focus of the market changes, money flows in different directions, and that can create buy opportunities, especially, I would say, in PI. Because it's a very passive way that these goods are generated into the game. It's not because you're doing abyssal content all of a sudden that you can't bring your PI to the market, that you can't keep up with your PI routine. And so as a result, maybe we will have some nice buy opportunities in the upcoming weeks here. I think it's possible if we look at what's happening with these advanced PI materials. Next up, we have the Tech 1 chips. That's at 2245. We'll go over these quickly, but as I've said, I think it's a very interesting idea to have like a Tech 1 abyssal content. That could be very cool, and that could become an incentive to create some more demand for that market. What would be a little bit unfortunate in the scenario, of course, is that there would now be abyssal dead space content that should yield better rewards than what I'm proposing here, which might mean that people will not find a lot of incentive to actually run those. But if you can maybe do that for some PvP abyssal content, right? Try to get that in a more controlled environment, then that could actually be quite interesting, right? Can you imagine that to try and keep that type of content a bit more fair, to try to keep the imbalance in power a bit lower, you would restrict that to Tech 1 chips. It also makes it more affordable, and it could actually bring this market back a little bit. Because if we look at this apocalypse chart, we are basically still below average. We're not going anywhere, and the volumes are like maybe 10 a day or something like that, which is quite abysmal. 140 million for the sellers, 128.5 million for the buyers. Nobody is buying apocalypses at the moment, and just a couple of people are selling them. Next up here, we've got the Caracal, obviously again also below average prices. The volumes of this are pretty normal, it's around 250 a day. It's a very popular ship, but it's selling for less than 9 million ISK, buyers coming in at 8 million ISK. Next up, we've got the Catalyst. Look at these volumes. I mean, it's quite unpredictable because it's a ganking platform, so from time to time I think people do grab quite a few of them just to replenish their ganking ships, but on average days we're sometimes talking less than 100 catalysts being traded, and these are traded currently at 1.1 million, 1 million for the buyers. It's a destroyer, of course. The Drake next, let's take a look at that. Around 100 being traded a day. Price is a little bit below average, but look at the buyers here. Above 40 million, we're talking just 4 units that are being being asked by the buyers here. After that, it's really not that much, and then sellers are coming in at 44 million, but it's 3, 1, 1, 6 here, 9 here, and you really don't. You see more supply than demand, but even the demand, the supply is not that great at the moment. Next up, Ferox, actually at a 1-year low point, heading for less than 40 million ISK, 40 million for the first seller, 42.5 you could say for most of them, but the buyers are coming in at 35.3 million, very, very cheap. And even then, this is really all there is. There's 1, 2, 3 buy orders in GTAF 4 for Feroxes, which is showing that there is just no demand outside of potentially Gnostic doctrines, but even those guys go for faction battleships, capital, supers. That's really the focus of the game. And at the moment, the Tech 1 sub-cap market is just really very low in quantity. Next up here, we've got the Megatron, going down in price as well. Did quite nicely to hold on to 150 million for so long, but with the current mineral prices, we are going down in price quite drastically. 142 million for the sellers, 132 for the buyers. Again, the buyers can't scroll here. Quantity 8, 1, 5, 10. So there's maybe 30, between 30 and 40 by Megatrons that are asked for by the buyers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buy orders in GTAF 4 for itself. It's just really, really low. The volumes show that as well. The Oracle next, also heading for a 1-year low point at 65 million ISK, 68 for the sellers, 61 for the buyers. Again, look at these buy orders. 5 buy orders in GTAF 4, 3 in the trade hubs around it, going from 61 to 10 million ISK on the lowest one. And the volumes, I mean, it's less. It's maybe 30, again 30 to 40 ships that are being bought here. Nothing really. Raven under pressure as well, lower mineral prices, volumes less than 100 a day being traded. Buyers, there is some demand for Ravens, but really it's 1, 3, 1, 2, 5. That's really not much, and the sellers are coming in here as well, 11, 11, which is probably putting some pressure on the Raven markets. The Retriever next, also down in price, could be interesting as well. Some sort of mining challenges, but I don't know if that's really such a good idea, because mining, you know, it's already a very important pillar of the game. It's what's keeping Tech 1 ships cheap, and messing too much with that, I think, might not be the right choice for more abyssal content. So 19.8 million for the sellers, 18 million for the buyers. Again, you can't scroll here. The volumes are a bit better on the buyer side of things, but it again shows that we're close to a 1-year low point. Volumes less than 100 a day. It's really not that much. Next up here, we got the Tempests. Volumes here quite erratic as well. I'd say that's again Nullsic purchases for some Tempest fleets potentially, but the average days are maybe 20 a day or something like that. Look at the buy orders here. We had 4 orders in Jita. That's it. That's like 10 Tempests being asked for, and then we got another 20 around here, but it's really not much. 146 million for the sellers, which also are coming in trickles, 1, 9, 1, 2, 1, lots of ones. So it's just a very slow market at the moment. Thrashers, you know, below average, not much to say. This is a very popular destroyer as well for ganking, so there are some more volumes, but they're selling for less than 1 million ISK. Next up here we get the Tornado, dropping off towards a 1-year low price as well. 58.5 for the sellers, 54 for the buyers. And there is some demand for that. as well. I actually saw like 5 tornadoes hanging around Amar to gang ships on the day the Into the Abyss came out. Obviously at these prices it's quite affordable. Next up here we get the Tristan, staying below 500,000 ISK, so not too strong on the demand side. 490 for the sellers, 422 for the buyers. It's being bought in somewhat better volumes. It's a very popular faction warfare platform, I think, because of the 5 small drones. So the ability to do that damage at higher ranges and then to just guide away. Yeah, it's just minerals too low and actual demand destruction outside of niches like that is very low as well. Venture actually still going up in price. I wonder if for some reason CCP can find the right way to advertise the game to newer players. And you know, the very first thing in EVE that does become, okay, I'm just gonna chill, it is to get into mining. And so for some reason there's quite a bit of demand for ventures. It could be that the battle venture fleets from a large group have an impact here as well. 340,000 for the sellers, 228 for the buyers. It's kind of sad to have to say that if you want to produce something, you might consider ventures at the moment. And then finally we've got the Vexor, also obviously well below average. A little bit of a volume spike here, but hardly showing up on the price. And it's selling for 9.4 million, 8.7 million for the buyers. Some more demand in volumes here. Maybe the Vexor can be considered a good tier 1 abyssal platform. It has both the medium and the small drones to handle different types of spawns. It's potentially pretty nice on tank as well. It's got that extra DPS from the high slots. I think it's possible that if you're gonna tackle some abyssal content as an alpha clone in tier 1, then a Vexor is probably the place to start. That could explain the increased volumes. That could also but unfortunately, right, the mineral prices are so low that hardly has had an impact on the price. Next up, the Tech 2 ships at 3120. Here we go. Focus on this category lies with the wrong one. Of course, it's mostly frigates because that's, I think, the price that makes it a bit easier, easier to get into trading with it. Volumes should be a little bit higher as well than stuff like cruisers, battleships and things like that. Of course, it's in the cruisers where all the action is, but we'll take a look at that as the extra product this week. Together with the filaments. So here is the Ares dropping off a little bit in price at the tail end here, heading towards 30 million is, but it's still selling for 31.8, 27.2 for the buyers. Well, 27.2 for the buyers. It's going to be around here on the market. That is maybe not so bad. I still feel it's quite risky, but you can see that there's quite a bit of demand at that range. Cerberus spiking up. Look at the volume increase back towards a 1-year high point. Currently selling for 335 million ISK. Buyers at 283. That is of course the Abyss. I think despite the fact that we were already playing around very high price of 300 million ISK, there's even more demand, and again the price shooting back up. So that little dip here to 280 was actually a small opportunity to grab a couple cheaper Cerberus. The Claw next, flat at this current price range, 34 million I suspect, so 33.6 for the sellers, 29.5 for the buyers. I'd say that's a nope. You know, selling maybe if you still have some cheap Claws lying around for some reason, but buying is still too high. The Ares, you could consider that, considering the big gap here to 27 million. You could consider that. The Crow next, let's take a look at that chart. After reaching a 1-year high point, is now finally dropping off 32 million. For one seller, it's mostly 37 million and 32 million for the buyers. So here again, if this is gone, you can still try to sell some Claws, but for an investment, I wouldn't buy just yet. Crusader next, climbing up to 35 million. It's not even on crazy volumes. This is just market action. 33.5 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. So I would say again, you could sell if you somehow manage to grab a couple at like 26, 27 million. Yeah, no buying here. Heretic flat at 80 million for the interdictors. Very, very expensive still. So I don't know. Wouldn't really be looking at that market right now. The Hound dropping to less than 30 million ISK. Let's see if there's a potential on the buyer side here. 31.6 for the sellers, 25.2 on the buyer side. Yes, I'd say that's okay. Considering the rest of the chart and the spikes up to 40 million ISK here with buyers at 25.3. That is definitely something you could consider, I think, if you want to make a Tech 2 investment. Ishtar next. That's not going to be pretty, of course. Volume increase, price to a one-year high point, selling for 420 million ISK, buyers at 374. That is, of course, the Abyss showing right here. The Tech 2 cruisers, as I said, because of their resistance profiles, make it a lot easier to get into the higher content, but there's always risk in those as well. And as a result, there is even more demand for something that was already very expensive. The Manticore dropping off, still above 30 million, so I think no. 34 for the sellers, 30.7 for the buyers. I think I would need to see buyers below 30 million before I jump on that. Nemesis, after another spike here as well, dropping off, back to 30 million on the daily averages. Less than that for the sellers, 26.8 for the buyers. I'd wait a little bit longer. We know that the Nemesis has the potential to actually drop to 25. The Pontifex next, Command Destroyer, also finally a little bit more stable, but the premium is obviously still there. 91 million for the sellers, 81 for the buyers. Super expensive. The Purifier next, holding at 35 million. So that's, 35 for the sellers, 32 for the buyers. That's, you could still sell if you manage to buy here, but honestly, no buy opportunity there either. The Raptor also coming down from 40 million ISK, so that's probably going to be a no again. 37.5 and 32.5 for the buyers, so that's a no for me. The Saber, very stable, but in the 70 to 80 million price band, quite expensive. Stiletto, double spike up to 40 million ISK, now slowly heading back for 30 million. Buyers are at 30.7. So here again, it's actually too late to sell, and it's definitely too early to buy. And then we've got the Stork that is slowly going down in price. Command Destroyer that cost 100 million ISK, so expensive. But it is going down in price a little bit, but it's basically just stabilizing at this high price range. And then finally we've got the Ternis that dropped to 30 million and actually spikes back up here. Sellers at 37, buyers at 27 million ISK. That's a bit of a relisting, I think, considering the quantity of that one order. The Tech 2 market, still very difficult. I do like when the buyers get close to 25 million. I think there you do have opportunities in these frigates to make some trades happen. We can also see that 30-35 million is often a range that you can very easily sell at, but it's still very difficult to time this market, especially now with the disruption again from Into the Abyss that is actually in all likeliness going to move quite a bit of production from the other categories to the cruiser markets. So yeah, it's a very difficult one to actively trade in. Next up we have the Tech 3 market at 37.15. Let's see what's happening here. We'll start as always with the destroyers. Here is the Confessor, after climbing to almost 40 million, is back down a little bit. 38 for the sellers, 35.6 for the buyers. A little bit more supply coming in, yeah, in the last 2 days. 39, 29, 13. Nothing too drastic just yet, so we're basically flat at what I would still consider to be a pretty low price. Hecate next actually broke 40 million, is now slowly heading back there. 42 for the sellers, 39 for the buyers. And here we do have almost a full front page of fresh Hecates coming in the last 24 hours. Volumes still not that crazy, but the opportunity to sell at above 40 million is probably not gonna last too long, as producers are trying to take advantage of that. Then we've got the Jackdaw that also spiked up to 50 million, but is already on its way back down as well, selling for 39 million, 35 million for the buyers. And here we can see 56 that basically precipitated. The high point was 48, 49 million. We're already back down below 40 because overproduction came in a bit too quickly. 24 hours, yeah, look at that, more than a full front page. That's actually like 2 to 300 Jackdaws probably. That is the difficulty, right? They saw this lovely opportunity to sell for more than 45 million. The response was a bit too heavy, so we're already back down, and 35 million for the buyers. very cheap in my opinion. Then finally we've got the Zwepel, that's a bit more stable like the Confessor, but at a very cheap price range, 36 for the sellers, 32 for the buyers. And here we do have a bit more of a problem with still like 400 or 500 of them hanging around at some price ranges. So oversupply. You gotta still be careful. That specter is looming from time to time. It's like peeking across the corner, I think. In the Confessor, it's not there. It's basically stable at what I would still consider cheap prices. But you can see the overreaction in the Jackdaw. You can see the production potential for these ships is quite high. And that can crash the price quite quickly. On the cruiser front, we've got the Legion that is slowly landing at 180 million ISK. 182 for the sellers, 170 for the buyers, but there's still, again, not that many on the market, so oversupply will, I think, always show up in destroyers first. In the cruisers here, it seems to be quite a bit more tricky. Nothing crazy, at least on the Legion sellers. Here is the Loki, also settling down at around like 240, I suspect. 240 for the sellers, 226 for the buyers. Again, look at that, there's 10, 16, 12 as the biggest one. Other than that, nothing crazy at all here. So no oversupply, basically some market action with very low amounts of ships. Proteus working its way to 200 million ISK, 196 for the sellers. Then there is 49 of them here, but that's really the only thing that springs out as being slightly higher in volume. So here again, there is some just market action happening with players trying to put them at prices that the market is willing to tolerate, and you can do that on those lower volumes. The Tengu has to give back quite a bit more ground, heading for less than 200 million, 190 for the sellers, 176 for the buyers, but still here, nothing too crazy. I think there's less than 100 of them on the seller side of things. So the only one really that shows the potential for that higher production is still there is the Jackdaw, and then the Zwepel as well, with those really big volumes. But it's only pinpricks from time to time on increased prices that we see that potentially there could still be overproduction in the Tech 3 market. It's, I don't think, really the focus of the market at the moment, because they're not usable into the Abyss. You can see some buy opportunities from time to time because of that combination, but you always have to be careful when it comes to overbuying, because overproduction can still happen at any time, in my opinion. Let's move on to the extra product at 4140. And I'm first going to take a quick look at the filaments, just out of personal interest. And also maybe to take a quick look at the pattern here. So the calm dark filaments started out at like, what is this price? 90 million ISK or something like that. Very expensive, currently selling for less than 10 million. And this is just going to keep getting cheaper and cheaper. The reason is I've been running some tier 1s and tier 2s. Lots of tier 1s drop from there. That is basically self-sustaining once you get going into the Abyss. And anything from data side is basically going to be oversupply that is going to keep adding pressure on this price. So I don't think that these will, even maintain the current price of 10 million, but it's already quite affordable, and just a single one of them can easily get you going into the Abyss. And yeah, so selling for 10 million, I think all of these, look at that, less than 9 million for a Calm Electrical, Exotic 7 million coming in, 6.9 for a Firestorm, and 10 million for the sellers of the Calm Gamma Filament. So it's really under pressure. That's also quite normal, and expect these to become dirt cheap in the future. I think Tech 2 is agitated. Look at that, coming in for 4 million ISK. And also 6 million. So these are also quite inexpensive. I think the reason is that tier 2s are going to be quite common, in the sense that they can drop from tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 sites, and so they have many more sources, and as a result something like the dark filament here is already going for 4 million ISK. Chaotic is also just selling for 10, well, some of them though at 68 million, so that still needs to be supplied by the market a little bit more heavily. Then we've got the Fierce, which is the tier 3, look at that, 4.2 million, 7 million. Fierce Exotic though, 40 million ISK, that's still a little bit rare, but you can see that eventually this will also stabilize in all likeliness at a very low price, definitely less than 10 million ISK. and then the raging ones 4 million, 6 million. There is also this tier in demand, of course. Tier 1, Tier 2, I think you'll see strong demand because anyone can basically run those without any real risk. Tier 3, 4, 5, the higher you go, the less demand because people, just aren't willing to risk their ships in those filaments. And as a result, I think across the board, this will actually just become super ubiquitous, super cheap, and getting into the abyss will not be a problem. Hopefully, I'd say they can also be used for other abyssal content, so that you don't need to add more and more categories as you expand on the content itself. I'm hoping that that's going to be the plan. But let's take a look at some of these cruisers as well, which is of course where all the action has been. Here are the faction cruisers. We'll start with the pirate ones. Let's take a look at the Ashimu. Not a very popular abyss ship, apparently. Some increase in volume, but the price is basically still pretty cheap. Here is the Cinnabal, not super popular, but obviously an increase in volume and price, currently selling for 157 million. I think for tier 1, tier 2, you can quite easily build an effective Cinnabal. Ortrus. Nope, nobody's doing abyssal content in the Ortrus. That's interesting. 205 million for the sellers, 194, pretty much a below average price, you could almost say. Still very affordable, the Ortrus. Phantasm, obviously volume increase went up in price to 144, so that's quite restrained. And well, the Phantasm lasers, it can suffer against like an increased speed abyssal dead space pocket with the very fast drones. I mean, then your lasers just gonna be useless. And it does have drones, if I'm not mistaken. It does have but 3 small drones. It's going to be quite painful to have to go through a full wave of those rogue drones, for instance. So it's tried, but I don't think it's going to be popular enough. Stradios, increased volume, price increase, 200 million for the sellers, 186 for the buyers. Still quite doable. Yeah. The tank on the Stradios is, I think, potentially a problem. I mean, it's a nice drone platform. It's gonna get you through tier 1 and tier 2, I think, without too much trouble. But it's also not an optimal ship for higher content. That's a little bit different for the Gila. Look at that. Increased volumes massively. Price 1 year high point, currently selling for 290 million ISK. Buyers coming in at 260. And I actually bought 4 Gilas for 200 million right before the expansion. I was expecting something like that, and I was actually a little bit surprised by that it's not the Gila that's increased by the most from what I've seen so far myself, but amongst the faction cruisers, the pirate faction cruiser is definitely the big winner, the go-to ship, of course. It's the first one where we're also seeing some guides and feeds pop up on Reddit that people are starting to, somewhat handle tier 4, tier 5 in some situations. So that's the pirate factions. We'll quickly take a look at the charts for the navy factions, but I don't suspect we'll see too much here. Caracal up a little bit, but nothing too crazy or abyss related, I don't think. Stabber fleet issue, I saw it mentioned a couple of times. It's quite expensive, but nothing too crazy. Vector Navy issue, 1 year high point, but nothing too crazy on the volumes here either. So it's the Gila when it comes to the pirate faction cruisers. Now for the advanced cruisers, heavy assault cruisers, that could be interesting. Here is the Sacrilege. Look at that volume increase, and then the price, 600 million ISK for a Sacrilege. Now that's why I said I'm not gonna replace the Sacrilege I lost. I'm actually just gonna grab one of my Gilas and see what we can do with that. But that is obviously more than double the price. I think, yep, 250 to 300 million at first. Now all of a sudden 600 million, and that's where the money is. The Zealot selling for 328, 1 year high point as well. Next up we've got the Cerberus. We saw that one already as well. 1 year high point already comes from a very high point, and increased volume is not that crazy. Also, of course, the Cerberus has been very popular in events before, so I think that's basically why it's not showing up as much as the Sacrilege. Then we've got the Eagle. Slight volume increase, nothing too crazy on the price there. Okay, I think the Demos was doing quite okay as well. Yep, look at that, increased in volume, 1 year high point, 430 million ISK for a Demos. And then the Ishtar, we already saw that as well, go up to 1 year high point as well of 420. And for the Minmatar, we get the Munin back down in price, so nothing too crazy there. It's a strong resist platform potentially, but apparently not too popular. And then the Vagabond, that is interesting. Look at that. Obviously Abyssal use and selling for 380 million. So let's take a quick look at the stats here. 5 small drones, definitely not bad. Projectile turrets. Shield booster amount, okay, so obviously active shield tank I think is the way to go. Signature radius penalty, you know, you've got a fast ship there with the micro-op drive. This can indeed be very interesting if you want to get like under the guns of the Triglavian ships, put some webs in there, just micro-op drive your way towards them without getting hit all that hard, and then try to grab them with the guns. Slot layout. 5 guns, 6 high slots, 4 medium slots, 5 low power slots. The shield tank is going to be tricky, but maybe you can get some regen going in the low slots. So yeah, the Vagabond, quite interesting. In fact, if anyone is still watching at this point, if you have a Vagabond fit for Into the Abyss, I would personally love to take a look at that as well. But the winners are obviously the heavy assault cruisers, which is normal. They have this better base resistance profile, so people are trying them out first. I think the Sacred still has that great potential. Just need to spend a bit more time on the right tank for the right content than what I did. And always be careful Into the Abyss, because who knows when a couple of Triglavians are coming in to ruin your day. Basically, if you see those guys, try to avoid the damage as long as possible, because when it ramps up it just doesn't stop and it becomes quite severe. That's the reason I lost my Sacrilege. Anyways, that's it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.